The summer of 1874 descended upon Arizona territory with a merciless grip, its heat radiating from the sandstone cliffs that surrounded the sparse settlements scattered across the unforgiving landscape. Among these settlements, nestled in a remote valley 40 miles from Tucson, stood the cabin of the Montoya family, built from sturdy pine logs hauled down from the mountains. The structure had withstood 7 harsh winters and scorching summers. The family patriarch Manuel Montoya had claimed this land after the Gadsden Purchase, establishing himself as one of the first Mexican-American settlers in the region following the territory's annexation by the United States. Sheriff James Harrington wiped sweat from his brow as his horse trudged along the narrow trail leading to the Montoya property. Complaints from traders in Tucson about missed deliveries and unpaid accounts had reached his office 3 days earlier. Normally such matters wouldn't warrant a sheriff's attention, but something about the traders' concerns struck him as unusual. The Montoyas were known for their reliability and honesty. "Manuel ain't missed a payment in 5 years," Tobias Green, the general store owner, had told him. "And his eldest, Francisco, always comes for supplies on the first Monday of the month. We ain't seen hide nor hair of any of 'em for near 6 weeks now." As Harrington approached the clearing where the cabin stood, an unnatural stillness hung in the air. No smoke rose from the chimney, and the small corral beside the house stood empty. The fields where corn and beans should have been reaching toward the summer sun lay untended, weeds already claiming the furrows. "Hello, anyone home?" Harrington called, his hand instinctively moving to rest on his holstered Colt. Only silence answered him. The cabin door stood slightly ajar. Dismounting and securing his horse to a post, Harrington approached cautiously, the floorboards of the small porch creaking beneath his weight. "Montoyas? Sheriff Harrington from Tucson?" Pushing the door open with his boot, he was immediately struck by the cabin's disarray. Chairs were overturned, a table lay on its side, and broken pottery was scattered across the packed dirt floor. A half-prepared meal had rotted on the hearth, the stench mixing with something else, a smell that the sheriff, a veteran of the Civil War, recognized all too well. But what struck Harrington most wasn't the signs of struggle or the lingering odor of death. It was what he didn't find. Despite the evident chaos, there were no bodies. The Montoya family, Manuel, his wife Isabella, their 5 children ranging from 23 to 7 years of age, and Manuel's elderly father had vanished without a trace. As Harrington examined the cabin, noting dark stains on the floor that could only be blood, a chill ran down his spine despite the oppressive heat. On the wall above the fireplace, scratched into the wood with what appeared to be a knife point, were words that made the hardened lawman's blood run cold. "They come at night. They have no faces." News of the Montoya family's disappearance spread through Tucson like wildfire. By the time Sheriff Harrington returned to town, a small crowd had gathered outside his office, hungry for details. Among them stood Dr. Edward Whitaker, the town's physician, and Father Thomas O'Malley from the newly constructed Catholic Church. "I'd like both of you to ride back with me tomorrow," Harrington told them, after dispersing the onlookers. "Doc, I need you to examine those bloodstains. Tell me if they're human." "Father, the Montoyas were devout parishioners of yours, weren't they?" Father O'Malley nodded solemnly. "Manuel never missed Sunday Mass when they came to town. Isabella was teaching the younger children their catechism. Any troubles that you know of? Enemies? Disputes over land?" The priest shook his head. "None that I'm aware of. They were peaceful folk, well respected." The next morning the 3 men rode out at dawn. Dr. Whitaker, a former Union Army surgeon, examined the cabin methodically. "These are indeed bloodstains," he confirmed, crouching near the darkest patch. "Several days old, maybe weeks. Not enough blood for multiple deaths, though perhaps one person was wounded here." While the doctor continued his examination, Father O'Malley stood before the scratched message, his face pale. "They have no faces." What could that mean? The ravings of someone in fear, Harrington suggested, though he felt uncertain. Further investigation revealed more troubling details. In the family's root cellar, they found stockpiles of food untouched. The Montoya's rifle was still mounted above the door, loaded but unfired. Their few valuables, a silver crucifix, Isabella's wedding jewelry, and a small pouch of gold dust Manuel had been saving, remained hidden in their expected hiding places. "This wasn't a robbery," Harrington muttered. Most disturbing was what they found in the children's sleeping area. Scratched into the wooden wall beside each child's pallet were peculiar symbols, circles with lines through them, arranged in patterns that made no sense to the men. "Some kind of Apache symbols," Dr. Whitaker suggested. "No," Harrington said firmly. "I've dealt with the local tribes for 15 years. This isn't their doing." As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the valley, Harrington made a decision. "We'll organize a proper search party. The family might be hiding somewhere nearby if they fled from whatever happened here. As they prepared to leave, Dr. Whitaker called them to the back of the property. "Sheriff, Father, you need to see this." Behind the cabin, at the edge of the family's small vegetable garden, the earth had been disturbed. 7 crude crosses, fashioned from twigs bound with strips of cloth, had been placed in a row. 7 crosses, Father O'Malley whispered. 7 family members. But no bodies, Harrington added, a sense of dread settling in his gut. No bodies at all. The search party combed the surrounding area for 3 days, but found no trace of the Montoyas. No bodies, no trail leading away from the cabin. No signs of where a family of 8 might have gone, or been taken. Sheriff Harrington interviewed every settler, trader, and traveler within 20 miles, but none reported seeing anything unusual near the Montoya property. "It's as if they vanished into thin air," he told Judge William Harrison as they sat in the judge's chambers a week after the discovery. "I've tracked men across deserts and mountains, but I've never seen anything like this." Judge Harrison, a gray-haired veteran of frontier justice, leaned back in his chair. "You mentioned Apache symbols. Could it have been a raid? The Apache don't take prisoners, not entire families, and they certainly don't leave valuables behind. Besides, Colonel Smithson at Fort Lowell confirms there's been no hostile activity reported." As word of the mystery spread, the people of Tucson began to talk. Some claimed the Montoyas had simply abandoned their homestead, though none could explain why they would leave their possessions or the ominous message behind. Others whispered of bandits from south of the border, though again, the lack of theft contradicted this theory. More troubling rumors began to circulate among the Mexican and indigenous populations. Elena Vasquez, who sold vegetables at the town market, crossed herself when Harrington questioned her. "There are stories," she said in a hushed voice, "old stories from before the Americans came, about the ones who walk at night, Los que no tienen cara, the ones without faces." "You believe in ghost stories, Mrs. Vasquez?" "I believe there are things in this territory older than any of us understand, Sheriff. Things the old ones knew to fear." That same day, Harrington received an unexpected visitor. Benjamin Taylor, a geology professor from back east who had been surveying the territory. "I heard about your missing family," Taylor said without preamble. "Were there any unusual markings found on or near their property, circles perhaps, or geometric patterns?" Harrington studied the man carefully. "How would you know about that?" Taylor placed a leather-bound journal on the desk. "Because the Montoyas aren't the first to disappear this way. 3 years ago, a prospector's camp near the Superstition Mountains. All 5 men vanished. Their possessions left behind, similar markings found carved into rocks. Before that, in '68, a family homesteading near what's now Phoenix, flipping through the journal, Harrington saw detailed sketches of symbols identical to those found in the children's sleeping area. What are these? I don't know," Taylor admitted. "I've shown them to experts in Indian languages, to scholars of ancient civilizations. No one recognizes them, but they appear at every disappearance site I've documented." "And what's your interest in this, Professor?" Taylor's expression darkened. "My brother was one of those prospectors. I've been tracking these ... incidents ever since." As Harrington absorbed this information, Deputy Miles burst into the office. "Sheriff, we got a situation out at the Watson place, maybe related to the Montoyas." The Watson farm lay just 15 miles from the Montoya cabin. Harrington rode hard, Taylor insisting on accompanying him. What they found left both men shaken. Thomas Watson, a rancher who had settled in the territory just 6 months earlier with his wife and teenage son, stood trembling on his porch, a shotgun clutched in white-knuckled hands. "They were out there last night," he stammered when he saw Harrington, "standing at the edge of my property. 5, maybe 6 of them." "Who, Mr. Watson? Who did you see?" "I don't know. They were just ... shapes. Like men, but ... He swallowed hard. "They had no faces, Sheriff. Just smooth skin where faces should be. My boy saw them too, fired a shot, but they didn't even flinch. They just ... watched us." Harrington exchanged glances with Taylor. "And this morning?" Watson pointed with a shaking hand toward his cattle pen. Inside lay 3 dead cows, arranged in a perfect circle, their heads pointing toward the center. And in the dirt between them, freshly drawn, was a circle with lines through it, identical to the symbols found in the Montoya cabin. Sheriff Harrington organized nightly patrols around the Watson farm and nearby homesteads. For a week, nothing unusual occurred. The symbols and dead cattle were documented, examined, and buried. Professor Taylor took rubbings of the symbols and added them to his growing collection of evidence. It was during this tense period of waiting that a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Tobias Green, the general store owner, Discovered a leather-bound journal while taking inventory. Francisco Montoya bought this from me back in April, Green explained, handing the journal to Harrington. Paid extra for his name stamped on the cover. Found it behind some crates, must have fallen there last time he was in. The journal contained entries spanning from early April to late May, just weeks before the family's disappearance. Entries were mundane, notes on crops planted, rainfall amounts, and family events. But beginning in early May, the tone changed dramatically. May 3rd. Father insists there is nothing to worry about, but I have seen them again. Standing at the edge of our field just after sunset. When I approach, they retreat into the shadows. Mother says I am imagining things, but Lucia Francisco's 16-year-old sister has seen them too. May 7th. They are coming closer each night. I tried to shoot one yesterday, but my bullet seemed to pass through it. Father finally saw them tonight. He no longer thinks I am imagining things. May 12th. The symbols appeared on our door this morning. Father says we must leave, but grandfather refuses. He says he has seen them before, many years ago, before the Americans came. He says running will not help. The most disturbing entry came near the journal's end, May 20th. Grandfather finally told us what they want. He has known all along. When he was a boy, his village made a pact with them. Every 20 years they would come. A sacrifice would be made, and the village would prosper. When the Americans came and the old ways were forgotten, the pact was broken. Now they have found us again. Grandfather says they will not stop. They will take what they are owed. The final entry, dated May 23rd, contained just 4 words. They are here tonight. Harrington handed the journal to Professor Taylor. What do you make of this? Some kind of cult? Human sacrifice? Taylor shook his head slowly. The dates match my other cases. Every 3 to 5 years since the territory was established, but Montoya's grandfather suggests a 20-year cycle before that. Whatever this is, it's been happening for generations. That evening, as Harrington and Taylor discussed their next steps in the sheriff's office, Father O'Malley burst through the door, his cassock covered in dust from hard riding. I found something, he gasped. In an old mission record from 1831, a Jesuit priest documented similar disappearances near what's now the Montoya property. Entire families vanishing, strange symbols left behind. Did he offer any explanation? Taylor asked eagerly. The priest hesitated. He wrote of ancient ones who preceded even the native peoples of this land. Beings that hunger not for flesh, but for essence. The mission was abandoned shortly after his report. The church authorities dismissed his claims as superstition or madness. As the 3 men digested this information, a commotion erupted outside. Deputy Miles led a dust-covered rider into the office, Sturmis Watson's teenage son. They've taken Pa and Ma, the boy sobbed. I was checking the north pasture when I heard Ma scream. By the time I got back, they were gone. Just gone. But they left this. He placed a rough cloth on Harrington's desk. Drawn upon it was a map, showing landmarks recognizable as the territory surrounding Tucson. And at its center, in the same area as the Montoya property, was a large symbol, a circle with 9 lines radiating outward like a sun. Dawn broke over the Arizona landscape as Sheriff Harrington led a party of 12 men toward the location marked on the crude map. Besides the sheriff, the group included Professor Taylor, Father O'Malley, Deputy Miles, and 8 volunteers, mostly ranchers and miners with military experience, all heavily armed. We don't know what we're riding into, Harrington had warned them before departure. Could be bandits using superstition as a weapon. Could be something else entirely. The location indicated on the map lay beyond the Montoya property, in an area of twisted canyons and ancient volcanic formations rarely traveled by white settlers. Old Spanish maps labeled it simply as Tierras Malditas, cursed lands. As they rode deeper into the rugged terrain, the men grew quieter. The landscape itself seemed to change subtly, the colors more muted, the shadows deeper despite the bright morning sun. Even the birds and insects fell silent. I've trapped in these parts for 15 years, whispered Caleb Johnson, one of the volunteers. Never seen it like this. It's like the land itself is holding its breath. By midday, they reached a narrow canyon entrance. Carved into the rock face on either side were weathered symbol circles with lines similar to those found in the Montoya cabin, but far older, the edges softened by centuries of erosion. These markings could be thousands of years old, Professor Taylor said, running his fingers over the ancient carvings. Predating any known civilization in this region. Father O'Malley crossed himself. The Jesuit records mentioned a temple older than Sin. I thought it was metaphorical. Leaving their horses secured at the canyon entrance, the men proceeded on foot. The passage narrowed until they were walking single file, the walls rising hundreds of feet above them, blocking most of the sunlight. After nearly a mile of careful progress, the canyon suddenly opened into a circular valley approximately half a mile across. In the center of this natural amphitheater stood a structure that caused every man to stop in his tracks. It resembled a step pyramid, but clearly wasn't Mayan or Aztec in design. The stone was black as coal, with no visible seams or mortar lines. 9 massive pillars surrounded it, each carved with the same circular symbols seen throughout their investigation. "My God," breathed Professor Taylor. "This architecture doesn't match any known prehistoric American culture. This shouldn't be here." As they cautiously approached the structure, Deputy Miles suddenly pointed toward the base of the pyramid. "Sheriff, look." Huddled against the black stone was a figure, a man rocking back and forth, muttering to himself. Even from a distance, Harrington recognized Manuel Montoya. The sheriff approached slowly, his hand on his gun. "Manuel? It's Sheriff Harrington from Tucson." Montoya didn't respond or even look up. His eyes stared blankly, his lips moving continuously as he mumbled in rapid Spanish. "Doctor." Whitaker, who had insisted on joining the expedition despite Harrington's concerns, knelt beside the man. "He's in shock. Severe trauma. Manuel, can you hear me?" When Montoya finally spoke coherently, his words sent ice through Harrington's veins. "They have no faces because they wear ours," he whispered. "They take our faces and walk among you. Where's your family, Manuel? Where are the Watsons?" Montoya's gaze shifted to the pyramid. "Inside. All inside." "But they're not. They're not." A low rumbling sound interrupted him, like distant thunder, though the sky remained clear. The ground beneath their feet trembled slightly. "We need to get inside, find the others," Harrington decided. "Miles, Johnson, Williams, stay here with Dr. Whitaker and Montoya. The rest of you with me." As they approached the pyramid, they discovered what appeared to be an entrance, a perfectly rectangular void in the otherwise seamless stone. No door, no markings around it, just absolute darkness within. Father O'Malley held up a lantern, but its light seemed to be swallowed by the darkness rather than penetrating it. "Sheriff, I don't think—" His words were cut short as the ground shook more violently. From within the entrance came a sound that defied description, not quite a voice, not quite animal. Something between a hum and a scream that vibrated in the men's bones rather than their ears. And then they emerged. 9 figures walked from the darkness, arranged in a perfect line. They were human in shape and size, dressed in simple clothing that might have been worn by any settler. But where their faces should have been, there was only smooth, featureless skin. As the men watched in horror, unable to move, the figures began to change. Features formed on the blank canvases of their heads, eyes, noses, mouths, until each wore a human face. Harrington recognized Isabella Montoya, 3 of her children, both of the Watsons, and faces he didn't know perhaps from previous disappearances. "Get back," Harrington shouted, raising his rifle. But before he could fire, Professor Taylor grabbed his arm. "Wait. Look at them closely." The faces weren't quite right. They sat unnaturally on the heads, like masks that didn't quite fit. And the eyes remained wrong, too large, too dark, with no whites visible. Manuel Montoya began to scream. "Don't shoot," Professor Taylor yelled as several men raised their weapons. "Look at their chests." Harrington's eyes dropped to the figures' torsos. Through the fabric of their clothing, he could see movement, pulsing, writhing shapes beneath the cloth. "What in God's name, ... double quotes, Father O'Malley whispered. The figure wearing Isabella Montoya's face stepped forward. When it spoke, the voice was hers, but with an underlying vibration that made the words seem to echo inside Harrington's skull. "You should not have come to this place, guardians of the New Order. This exchange is ancient. It does not concern you." Harrington steadied himself. "What exchange? What have you done with these people?" The figure tilted its head at an impossible angle. "We take what is owed. The early ones understood. Before your kind brought your crosses and your laws, there was balance. A few given so the many might prosper. They're still alive?" Taylor asked, stepping forward despite Harrington's restraining hand. "The essence remains. The vessel changes." The figure gestured toward the pyramid. "When your people forgot the covenant, we came to collect the debt. We have always collected." Father O'Malley clutched his crucifix. "In God's name, release these souls." The creature wearing Isabella's face turned toward him, its 2 large eyes blinking slowly. "Your God is young. We walked these lands when the mountains were new. We will walk them when they are dust." As it spoke, the other 8 figures began to move, spreading out in a semicircle. Harrington noticed with growing dread that they were effectively cutting off the expedition's route back to the canyon. "What do you want from us?" Harrington demanded, trying to keep his voice steady. "Nothing. You are not part of the covenant, but you have trespassed in our domain. Witnesses cannot return." At these words, the men finally broke. Someone fired a shot, the rifle crack echoing off the canyon walls. The bullet struck the figure wearing Isabella's face squarely in the chest, but instead of falling, the creature merely staggered slightly. The wound leaked, not blood, but a thick black substance that moved like quicksilver. Chaos erupted. The expedition members fired wildly as the faceless beings advanced with unnatural speed. Harrington saw Johnson go down, a creature's unnaturally elongated fingers wrapped around his throat. Williams fired his shotgun at point-blank range into another's chest, creating a gaping hole through which Harrington glimpsed not organs, but a writhing mass of what looked like black tentacles. "The symbols!" Taylor shouted above the gunfire. The journal said they're repelled by the symbols. Harrington remembered Francisco's journal entry. "I tried to shoot one yesterday, but my bullet seemed to pass through it." Conventional weapons were clearly ineffective. Father O'Malley was already ahead of them. The priest had taken a piece of chalk from his pocket and was frantically drawing on a flat rock, recreating the circle and line symbols they had seen throughout their investigation. As he completed the design, the nearest creature recoiled visibly, its borrowed face contorting in what appeared to be pain. "It works!" the priest shouted. "The symbols, they're some kind of ward." Harrington grabbed Manuel Montoya, who had fallen into a catatonic state. Everyone back to the canyon entrance. "O'Malley, bring that rock." The retreat became a desperate race, the men carrying their wounded while Father O'Malley held the inscribed stone before him like a shield. The creatures followed at a measured pace, seemingly confident in their ability to prevent escape. At the narrowest part of the canyon, Harrington made his decision. "Taylor, get these men out. I'll hold them here." "You can't stop them alone," the professor protested. "I'm not trying to stop them." Harrington pulled a bundle of dynamite from his saddlebag, brought along in case they needed to clear any blocked passages. "I'm bringing the mountain down." Understanding dawned on Taylor's face. "The canyon walls... get everyone clear, at least 500 yards. As the others retreated with their wounded, Harrington positioned the explosives at the narrowest point of the passage, where the canyon walls rose almost vertically. The creatures were approaching, now less than 100 yards away. Setting the longest fuse he dared, Harrington lit the dynamite and ran. Behind him, he could hear that strange humming, screaming sound growing louder. The explosion sent shock waves through the entire canyon system. Tons of rock crashed down, filling the narrow passage completely. A cloud of dust billowed out, enveloping Harrington as he ran. When he finally caught up with the others, his lungs burning and his eyes caked with dust, Taylor grabbed his arm. "Did it work?" Harrington looked back. The passage was completely sealed by fallen rock. "For now. But something tells me that won't hold them forever." The expedition's return to Tucson was somber. Of the 12 men who had ventured into the canyon, only 8 returned alive. Johnson and 2 others had been killed in the confrontation. Williams had survived but remained unconscious, his breathing shallow. Manuel Montoya was alive physically, but his mind appeared broken beyond repair. He alternated between catatonic silence and periods of frenzied muttering about the ones who wear our faces. Dr. Whitaker arranged for him to be transported to a sanitarium in California, though he held little hope for recovery. In the sheriff's office, Harrington, Taylor, and Father O'Malley gathered to make sense of what they had witnessed. Judge Harrison joined them, his initial skepticism fading as he examined the evidence and heard the consistent accounts from multiple witnesses. "These beings," the judge said carefully. "You believe they've been in this territory for centuries, taking people every few years?" "Longer than centuries," Taylor replied. "The structure we found predates any known civilization in the Americas. And based on Montoya's grandfather's account, they operated on a 20-year cycle until the American settlement disrupted whatever covenant existed. Now they're taking people more frequently," Harrington added, "compensating for the broken agreement." Father O'Malley spread his notes on the table. "I've been researching similar incidents. There are accounts from Spanish explorers in the 1500s describing demons without faces who claimed settlers in the northern provinces. The church dismissed these as superstition, but the details match what we encountered." Judge Harrison rubbed his temples. "What do you propose we do?" "We can't exactly arrest these ... creatures. And who would believe this story outside this room?" "The symbols," Harrington said. "They're our only advantage. They seem to cause the creatures pain, or at least repel them." Taylor nodded. "I'm cataloging every symbol we've found. If we can understand their meaning, perhaps we can create more effective wards." "And we warn people," Harrington insisted. "Not with the full truth. They'd think us mad. But we can alert settlers to watch for specific signs, strange figures at night. Symbols appearing on buildings, missing livestock arranged in patterns." "The army should destroy that structure," Judge Harrison suggested. Father O'Malley shook his head. "Would you destroy a wasp's nest without killing the wasps? They'd only become more aggressive. Besides, I'm not convinced conventional weapons would even damage that pyramid." The stone isn't like anything I've ever seen. As the men debated, Dr. Whitaker entered with grim news. Williams just died. Never regained consciousness, but there's something you need to see. He unwrapped a cloth bundle on the table, revealing what appeared to be a small, black, slug-like creature about 6 inches long, now dead and partially dried. This was embedded in his chest wound. I found it during examination. Taylor leaned forward, his scientific curiosity overcoming his revulsion. It appears to be some sort of parasite. Like nothing I've ever encountered, Dr. Whitaker confirmed. Its cellular structure is ... wrong. I can find no mouth, no digestive system. Yet it seems to have been absorbing blood directly through its skin. Harrington felt a chill as realization struck him. They're not wearing our faces, he whispered. They're wearing our people. Like suits. The implications hung heavily in the room. The creatures they'd encountered weren't simply killing their victims, they were somehow inhabiting them, using human bodies as vessels. We need to know if there are more of them out there, Judge Harrison said quietly. Already among us. The men exchanged uneasy glances, the same question in all their minds. How would they recognize a person who had been taken? In the weeks that followed, Sheriff Harrington developed a system. Every person who entered his office was subtly observed for specific behaviors noted in their encounters with the creatures. Unnatural head movements, prolonged blinking, the slight delay before emotional responses. Professor Taylor, who had decided to remain in Tucson indefinitely, worked with Father O'Malley to document and analyze the protective symbols. They discovered that certain combinations seemed more powerful than others based on both historical accounts and their own limited testing. The symbols appear to be a form of written language, Taylor explained, not just random markings. They're syntax, repetition of elements in specific contexts. I believe they're words of power from whatever civilization originally encountered these entities. The town council was informed of a sanitized version of events. Hostile individuals with possible connections to the Montoya and Watson disappearances had been encountered but had escaped. Additional patrols were established for outlying homesteads, and settlers were advised to report any unusual sightings immediately. Then the disappearances began again. First, a solitary prospector vanished from his camp 10 miles east of town, then a family of 4 on the western outskirts of the settlement. In both locations, the now familiar symbols were found not as wards but as markers, claiming marks. They're getting closer to town, Harrington told his deputies, and they're adapting their strategy. Most disturbing was the disappearance of Tobias Green, the general store owner who had first alerted Harrington to the Montoya's absence. One morning, his store simply didn't open. When Harrington investigated, he found the man's living quarters above the store immaculate bed made. No signs of struggle, as if Green had simply walked out and never returned. But on his desktop calendar, a circle with 9 lines had been drawn over that day's date. They're sending a message, Taylor said when Harrington showed him. They know we're watching for them. 3 days after Green's disappearance, a stranger arrived in Tucson. He registered at the hotel as Jonathan Smith from St. Louis, claiming to be a representative for a mining company looking to invest in the territory. Something about the man's 2 perfect movements caught Harrington's attention immediately. Have Deputy Miles watch him, Harrington instructed discreetly. I want to know everyone he talks to. That evening, Smith visited several establishments in town, engaging various citizens in seemingly casual conversation. He asked questions about recent events, local landmarks, and most concerning to Harrington, the expedition to the canyon. When Smith retired to his hotel room, Harrington, Taylor, and 2 deputies positioned themselves in the adjoining rooms. They waited through the night, listening for any unusual sounds. Near dawn, Deputy Miles reported movement. Smith had left his room and was heading toward the livery stable. Following at a distance, they watched as Smith saddled a horse and rode south out of town. Harrington and Taylor pursued, maintaining enough distance to avoid detection. 5 miles outside Tucson, Smith veered off the main trail into a rocky area where tracking would be difficult. When Harrington and Taylor caught up, they found the horse tethered to a scrub oak. But no sign of Smith. There, Taylor whispered, pointing to a narrow crevice in the rocky hillside. It looks like a cave entrance. Drawing their weapons, the men approached cautiously. From within the darkness came voices, multiple voices, speaking in tones that carried that same unnatural vibration they had heard at the pyramid. Harrington gestured for Taylor to hold position while he edged closer to listen. Double quotes ... The watchers are vigilant, came Smith's voice, though with the strange harmonics that betrayed his true nature. They mark their dwellings with the old signs. Some remember the old ways. Another voice responded, a voice Harrington recognized with horror as Tobias Green's. The barriers they create are weak. They do not understand the true meaning of the symbols. The harvest can continue. The sealed passage? Asked a third voice, unfamiliar to Harrington. Already cleared, replied Smith. The stone-breaking tools of the new ones are useful. We have returned to the temple. The extraction proceeds. Extraction. The word sent shivers down Harrington's spine. What exactly were these creatures taking from their victims? As he leaned forward to hear more, a loose stone shifted beneath his boot, clattering down the slope. The voices inside fell instantly silent. Run, Harrington hissed to Taylor just as something emerged from the cave entrance, a figure that was undeniably not human despite its outward appearance. Smith's face seemed to ripple, the features becoming fluid as what lay beneath pushed against the human mask. Harrington fired 3 shots in rapid succession, striking the creature squarely in the chest. It staggered but didn't fall. Instead, its chest cavity seemed to open, revealing the writhing black mass they had glimpsed during the canyon confrontation. From this mass extended a tendril that whipped toward Harrington with impossible speed, wrapping around his ankle. The sheriff fell hard, his gun skittering away across the rocks. Taylor, who had been carrying a small pouch of the protective symbols drawn on cloth, threw one directly at the creature. The effect was immediate. The tendril released Harrington, retracting into the chest cavity as the creature recoiled. "We need to get back to town," Taylor shouted, helping Harrington to his feet. "Warn everyone." As they ran toward their horses, Harrington glanced back to see not just Smith, but 3 figures emerging from the cave, their faces shifting and flowing like wax melting in the sun. Harrington and Taylor rode hard for Tucson, pushing their horses to the limit. Behind them, they caught glimpses of their pursuers, 3 riders moving with unnatural synchronization, gaining ground despite the head start. "They're faster than us," Harrington shouted over the thundering hooves. "We won't make it to town before they catch up." Taylor pointed to a rock formation ahead. "There, we can make a stand." They dismounted at a natural stone circle, reminiscent of the amphitheater where they had found the pyramid, but on a much smaller scale. As the creatures approached, Taylor hurriedly began placing the cloth symbols in a ring around their position. "Will that hold them?" Harrington asked, reloading his revolver despite knowing its limited effectiveness. "I don't know," Taylor admitted, "but it's all we have." The creatures halted just outside the hastily created perimeter, their borrowed faces now barely maintaining human appearance. Smith's features had almost completely dissolved, revealing the smooth, featureless countenance beneath. For several minutes, a tense standoff ensued. The creatures tested the barrier, approaching from different angles but never crossing the line of symbols. They made no sound, but Harrington felt a pressure building in his head as if something were trying to push its way into his thoughts. "They're trying another approach," Taylor whispered, his face contorted in pain. "Mental ... intrusion ... quotes." Suddenly the pressure ceased. The creatures retreated several paces, conferring in that strange vibrating language. Then, to Harrington's astonishment, they turned and rode away. "They're giving up?" he asked incredulously. Taylor shook his head. "No. They're changing tactics again. Something's wrong." They waited until the creatures had disappeared from sight before cautiously emerging from their protected circle. Mounting their horses, they continued toward Tucson at a more measured pace, constantly scanning for signs of ambush. As they crested the final ridge overlooking the town, the reason for the creatures' retreat became clear. Smoke rose from multiple buildings in Tucson. Gunshots echoed across the valley. "My God," Harrington breathed. "They weren't chasing us away from town, they were delaying us while others attacked." Spurring their exhausted horses forward, they descended into chaos. The main street was deserted except for 2 bodies lying motionless in the dust. Windows had been smashed, doors broken open. The sounds of fighting came from the direction of the church. They found the survivors barricaded inside the sturdy stone building. Father O'Malley had organized the town's defense utilizing his knowledge of the protective symbols. Every window and door was marked with the circles and lines, creating a sanctuary the creatures couldn't penetrate. "They came from everywhere," Deputy Miles reported, his arm hastily bandaged. "People we knew, or thought we knew. Green was among them, and Mrs. Peterson from the bakery, and others. ... Their faces kept slipping. "How many townsfolk got inside?" Harrington asked, surveying the frightened civilians crowded into the nave. "Maybe 60, Father O'Malley answered, "out of over 200. The rest ... His voice trailed off. "They're not all dead," a woman sobbed from nearby. "They took my David alive. I saw them dragging him toward the edge of town." Taylor pulled Harrington aside. "The extraction Smith mentioned, they're taking more vessels. But why so many at once? They've never been this bold." The answer came as night fell. From the church tower, Harrington and Taylor watched as strange lights appeared on the horizon to the south, the direction of the pyramid. pulsing, shifting colors that hurt the eyes if viewed too long. "They're preparing for something," Taylor murmured. "Something big enough to risk exposing themselves like this." Throughout the night, the creatures prowled the town, testing the church's defenses but never breaching them. Their numbers had grown. At least 30 distinct entities were visible at various times, all wearing the faces of Tucson's citizens with varying degrees of success. By dawn, they had withdrawn, but smoke on the horizon indicated they had established a position just outside town. "We need to get a message to Fort Lowell," Harrington decided. "The army may be our only hope." Volunteers were called for someone to attempt the dangerous 15-mile ride to the fort. A young cowhand named Jenkins stepped forward. "I know every back trail and wash between here and there," he assured Harrington. "I can make it, equipped with protective symbols and the fastest horse available." Jenkins slipped out through a back window during a lull in the creature's patrols. They watched anxiously as he made it to the edge of town and disappeared into the brush. Hours passed with no sign of army reinforcements. As sunset approached, a new development chilled Harrington to the bone. The creatures had begun constructing something in the town square, a smaller version of the Black Pyramid they had discovered in the canyon, built from materials scavenged from Tucson's buildings. "What are they doing?" Father O'Malley wondered, watching through a small window. "Creating a conduit," Taylor suggested grimly, "a connection to their main structure." As darkness fell, the miniature pyramid began to emit the same disturbing light they had observed on the horizon the previous night. And with the light came a sound, that humming screaming that vibrated in their bones rather than their ears. Inside the church, people began to panic. Children cried, covering their ears, though the sound wasn't truly audible. Adults prayed or argued about making a break for safety. "We can't stay here indefinitely," Judge Harrison pointed out. "Our food and water will last 3 days at most." "Jenkins will get through," Harrington insisted. "The army will come." But as midnight approached with no sign of rescue, the situation deteriorated further. Several townsfolk reported hearing voices in their heads, the voices of loved ones taken by the creatures, begging to be let inside the church. "It's James," wept Mrs. Cooper, pressing herself against the door. "He's out there asking for help." "It's not your husband anymore," Taylor told her firmly, pulling her away. "Whatever is wearing his face is not James." The psychological assault continued throughout the night, wearing down the survivors' resolve. By morning, Harrington knew they couldn't withstand another day of siege. "We need to destroy that pyramid they're building," he told Taylor and Father O'Malley. "It's strengthening them somehow, allowing them to project these influences." "How?" Father O'Malley asked. "We can't leave our sanctuary without being taken." Harrington looked thoughtfully at the church's bell tower. "Maybe we don't have to leave." The old church bell had been cast in Spain 2 centuries earlier, weighing nearly 500 pounds. It hung in the tower above the nave, operated by a heavy rope that descended to the church floor. "If we can drop it directly onto that pyramid they're building," Harrington explained, "the weight might be enough to shatter it." The challenge lay in precision. The bell would need to be removed from its mounting and positioned directly above the structure in the town square. Additionally, they would need enough rope to lower it temporarily while they aligned it, then drop it on command. "We'll need to open the tower shutters," Taylor pointed out. "That will expose us to their mental influence." "I'll do it," Father O'Malley volunteered. "My faith may provide some protection." As preparations were made, a commotion arose from the church's rear entrance. Jenkins had returned alone, exhausted and bearing grim news. "Fort Lowell is under attack as well," he gasped as Dr. Whitaker tended to his wounds. "The same creatures wearing soldiers' faces. I couldn't get inside, but I saw them dragging people toward the south. The same direction as that pyramid you found." The situation was more dire than they had realized. This wasn't just an attack on Tucson, it was happening across the territory. A mass extraction, as the creatures had called it. With renewed urgency, they proceeded with the bell plan. 4 strong men carefully detached the massive bell from its mountings, while Father O'Malley prepared himself with prayer and protective symbols drawn directly onto his clothing. By mid-afternoon, they were ready. The church's tower shutters faced directly onto the town square, where the creatures continued their incomprehensible work around their miniature pyramid. The structure now pulsed with energy, tendrils of that strange light reaching skyward. "Whatever they're building, it's nearly complete," Taylor observed. "We need to act now." Father O'Malley climbed to the tower with Harrington and Taylor. The moment the shutters were opened, they felt the mental assault intensify, whispers, pleas, threats flooding their minds. The priest staggered but remained standing, clutching his crucifix. "Focus on the task," Harrington urged as they maneuvered the bell into position, suspended now on ropes held by men below. In the square, the creatures noticed the activity. Several pointed upward, their faces shifting and flowing as their agitation grew. They began to move toward the church, testing the boundaries created by the protective symbols. They know what we're attempting, Taylor said, his voice strained. Below, the light emanating from the pyramid intensified. The humming, screaming sound grew louder, threatening to overwhelm coherent thought. Father O'Malley began to bleed from his nose and ears, but continued to help position the bell. Almost there, Harrington grunted, making a final adjustment. The bell now hung directly above the pyramid, suspended only by ropes that ran down through the tower to the men waiting below. Suddenly, the creatures changed tactics. Rather than continuing their mental assault, they began physically attacking the church. Working in concert, they used scavenged tools to attempt to break through doors and windows, seemingly willing to sacrifice themselves to breach the sanctuary. "Now," Harrington shouted down the tower. "Drop it now." The men below released the ropes. The massive bell plummeted toward the pyramid, picking up speed. In the final moment before impact, Harrington swore he saw the creatures in the square stop their assault and raise their hands in a unified gesture, almost like benediction. The bell struck the black structure with devastating force. But instead of shattering the pyramid, something entirely unexpected occurred. The moment of impact produced a blinding flash of light and an explosion of energy that knocked Harrington, Taylor, and Father O'Malley to the floor of the tower. When they recovered enough to look outside, what they saw defied explanation. The pyramid had not been destroyed. Instead, it had absorbed the bell entirely, the metal seemingly flowing into the black stone like water into sand. And the structure was changing, growing, evolving, the light it emitted now visible even in daylight. "We made it stronger," Taylor whispered in horror. Before they could retreat, a pulse of energy erupted from the pyramid, washing over the town like a visible wave. When it struck the church, the protective symbols flared with brilliant light, and then burned away, leaving only scorch marks on the stone. "Get back downstairs," Harrington ordered, helping the now unconscious priest. "The barriers are down." In the nave, panic had given way to eerie silence. The townsfolk stood motionless, their eyes fixed on the main doors, which now stood open despite having been barricaded. And through those doors walked a figure that Harrington recognized with a jolt of terror. It was Manuel Montoya, or rather, the thing that now wore Manuel's face. Behind him came others, each wearing familiar faces with that same unnatural stillness, that same wrongness about the eyes. "The cycle ends," the creature wearing Manuel announced, its voice reverberating through the church with painful intensity. "The final harvest begins." Harrington drew his gun, knowing it was useless but unwilling to surrender without resistance. Beside him, Taylor clutched his last protective symbol, a cloth bearing the most complex arrangement they had decoded. As the creatures advanced into the church, Taylor thrust the symbol forward. The lead entity, the one wearing Manuel, stopped momentarily, its borrowed face contorting in what might have been pain. But then it reached out and grasped the cloth. To Harrington's astonishment, the symbol began to change, the lines rearranging themselves under the creature's touch. "You do not understand what you use," it said, almost sadly. "These are not wards against us. They are the words of our creation, the binding that gives us form." Taylor's academic mind made the connection first. "You're saying these symbols ... made you? Before your kind walked upright, others came to this world? They shaped us from the void, gave us purpose? The covenant was their creation balance exchange, until your kind forgot." The creature extended its hand, palm up, toward Harrington. "It ends now. The wheel turns. A new cycle begins." In that moment, Sheriff James Harrington understood what had been happening all along. These creatures weren't invaders or predators in the conventional sense. They were caretakers of some ancient equilibrium that human settlement had disrupted. The extraction wasn't random violence, it was adjustment, recalibration. Knowledge, however, did not equal acceptance. There must be another way, he insisted. Coexistence without taking our people. The creature tilted Manuel's head at that impossible angle. "There is no coexistence with vessels. Only exchange. The many for the balance of all." As it spoke, the creatures behind it moved forward with terrible purpose, surrounding the townspeople. The pyramid in the square pulsed in rhythm with their advance. In the final moments before the creatures reached them, Taylor grabbed Harrington's arm. "The symbols, they said they're the words of their creation," which means ... double quotes, understanding dawned on Harrington's face. They could also be the words of their unmaking, but it was too late for such insights to save Tucson. As darkness fell over the Arizona territory that night, the strange lights visible from the direction of the ancient pyramid grew to unprecedented brightness, then winked out entirely. When an army patrol from Fort Grant finally reached Tucson 3 days later, they found the town intact but completely deserted. No bodies, no signs of violence beyond some broken windows and doors. 217 people had simply vanished, leaving meals half-eaten on tables and personal possessions untouched. Only in the church did they find any clue to what had happened. Scratched into the stone floor of the nave was a message, written in what appeared to be Sheriff Harrington's handwriting, but with an uncharacteristic tremor. They have no faces. They wear ours. The covenant is renewed. 20 years of peace. Remember. And beside these words, a perfect circle with 9 lines radiating outward like a sun,